we're continuing with kind of Come Walk With Me theme, which you've heard the last couple weeks. I think in seminary and Bible school, they teach you, like, when you preach, pick, like, one verse or two. Be really concise. Hang on that verse really tight. Well, I didn't go to Bible school, obviously. We're doing Mark 1 through 10 today. We're not actually going to read through it all, but over at English Lake, we've been walking our way through Mark. It takes us years to get through a book of the Bible usually, and we're not even to 10 yet. I think we started last year. But there's some cool themes that have come out of that really relate to where you guys are kind of starting with this Come Walk With Me thing. And I also like to sort of bounce back to the last couple sermons. So I like that you guys put your sermons on YouTube. You guys should go check those out if you missed a Sunday. But I like to listen back. And last 2 Sundays ago, and this was on the newsletter this week, I noticed too. I think this is Josh's whiteboard. Now, my new job down at Purdue, I work with the College of Ed, and I spend most of my time teaching math to, like, underprivileged kids. And so, Josh, if you, like, I'm not sure what's going on, but, like, call me, okay? Call me. I wasn't even sure which way to put this, like, horizontally, vertically. Maybe you guys remember what happened that day. I don't know. And then also yesterday, I'm going to stick with the Berkeys. Oh, that's what it is. Yeah, okay. I'll quit looking at it. You're throwing me off. And then also I get to listen to Jay's in the car. I have about 3 hours in the car a couple days a week now. And I'm on 65 the whole time, so I usually get some podcasts or listen to something or audiobooks. And I was catching up on some of your guys' sermons as well, just to prepare a little bit. And I was listening to Jay's sermon, and on 65, it's nice. I can set my cruise now, and I'm a cruise guy. I just set it on like 70, and just go and just listen. And you start zoning, not out, because I was listening to Jay. So I was zoning in to Jay's message. And all of a sudden, usually where I set my cruise, I'm one of the faster cars. And so, and when you drive the same route over and over, you guys get it. All of a sudden, I noticed cars were passing me, and I looked down, and I was like down at 60 or something. It's like, what the heck? So I like click. I don't touch the pedals. I don't know if that's legal, but I just clicked my little cruise control back up, and then I'm kind of zoning in a little bit, and then like 10 minutes later, I'm back down to 60, and I'm like, what is going on? And I realized with Jay's fantastic like preaching volume, sometimes he gets a little animated, a little loud. I sort of naturally click the volume down as I go, and then I have to go back up again. And that button's right next to my cruise control button. So that is actually not a lie. That happened like 2 or 3 times. And so I kind of had to focus, like, all right, which side is the cruise and which side is the volume? And I got it. But this has been a really fun theme to kind of listen to and to walk with a little bit through you guys. I also want to bring, I think last time I was here, we were just getting ready to go to Jordan with Art and Louise. And we went back in October, and we bring some greetings from Amjad, who is right next to Art there. And then his son, Sam. And then this is Case, a guy who works with Crew, actually, Campus Crusade there in Jordan. And he translates for us, and he's kind of become part of our family there. And we had a fun time with them as well. They basically work mostly with Syrian refugees. Their whole church is basically Syrian refugees. They have a few local Christians that come. But he's got 150 Syrian kids that come to their Sunday schools. They did a little trip to the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. You can see them with some of their kids. This is Sanaa, his wife, who wasn't in that first picture. She's Syrian, but now has Jordanian citizenship and goes back and forth quite a bit to Syria. They had a fun little trip. Some of these, you can pray for us in March. In just 2 months, we're taking a couple young couples from English Lake that are in leadership with us there to hang out with some of their young folks as well. These at the bottom here are some of the older siblings. These are all Syrian kids. And the older siblings just sort of naturally serve as like help during the services. They kind of help translate into like Syrian dialect a bit for Amjad when he's going, and they kind of keep order with all those kids you can imagine. And he has this crazy way of walking and discipling these guys. Most of them aren't even Christians yet, but they come and they love being there. And he's kind of flipping discipleship on its head when, we're going to talk about a little bit about that today. But they're swimming in the river. You can see right here is the Jordan River with Israel on the one side. You can sort of see I think that's Israel flag right there. And this is the Jordan side, and it's not very far away. Amjad is pretty awesome. He has just a really cool view of like the situation right now. Basically, the Syrians, none of them have left yet, even though the war is sort of ending. It's just the problems aren't going to end. but a lot of the money and resources are drying up that are coming in from the UN and other places because there's other problems in other places, things in the world. And a lot of Jordanians complain because they've gone from 6 million Jordanians and they've added about 2 million refugees in the last 10, 15 years, Iraqis and Syrians. And I mean, that's a 33% increase. Imagine if we added 100 million people to our country tomorrow. And he talked to me last time I saw him in October about how the cities of refuge back in the Old Testament, there were a few of them scattered throughout Jordan. And he sees that as like a prophetic declaration of like that's what they're there for. They're there to serve these people, and Jordanians are running out of resources themselves. I think that's just a beautiful view of people that are struggling, and Jordanians are having their own issues trying to keep jobs and all those things, but how they're serving people as they go. And here's another pastor, Ehab, in the middle. He's an Egyptian guy that Art and I hung out with too in October, and he's got other interests. He's got a crazy situation. Same with him. Funds are drying up. He serves mostly refugees. His church is like 300 or 400 Christians, refugees from Iraq, Muslim refugees from Syria and Iraq, Druze, which are kind of a funny mix of Hindu and Muslim, and then these like Sabaean guys who believe in John the Baptist but not Jesus. He's got all these groups, and they used to sit all separate in his church. And he said, he used this phrase with us, and you can imagine Art. He said, but I told them we're family, and we don't sit apart like that. So they all like sit together. And when Art heard that, I heard it in Arabic, but when Art heard that word translated in English, that changed a lot of things. And like 5 minutes later, we're just sort of saying this prayer for him, and I look up, and Art is on his hands and knees, bawling, like praying over Ehab is his name, praying over his feet that he would carry this, and praying over his knees that it could bear the the burdens in his shoulders, and like we all just cried for like 10 minutes. It was very intense. So this guy just has he's got no funds or money left or resources to serve the refugees that they serve. So he's a guy that we're probably going to continue to walk with, and we're going to go visit him in March as well. So if you guys could pray for that trip, that would be awesome. One thing that Art's done with them, and I want to touch on this briefly as we talk about walking with folks, is wells and fences. And I'm guessing Shane has talked about that at some point here. I want to touch on that real briefly. This is the way Amjad kind of does things there, and it's a way that we're trying to push into as a church as well at English Lake, Cornerstone, West Lafayette. Normal churches... you gave me this marker, didn't you? Okay. Normal churches, where they set up, we sort of have a fence that we put up around them. And this is kind of compared to cattle ranching. In America, we build these fences to try to keep our cattle in because we don't want them getting out. And we also want to keep bad things from getting in. Okay? So fences serve a good purpose to like protect ourselves and also not only allow certain things in that we want in certain people. And a lot of times churches tend to get to this. There's sort of expectations, behaviors. You can come in as long as you act this way or be this way. If you break some of these codes, you have to leave. Now, this other way of ranching is Australia. They can't really afford just to put fences everywhere. It's just too vast and whatever. And so what they do is they build a well. And here I go making fun of Josh. Here's my well, though. Oh, gosh. There's a little thingy and a bucket. Okay. In Australia, they build wells because they know when the cattle find the well and know where to drink water, they can leave, but those cattle are going to do what when they get thirsty? They're going to come back to the well, okay? They don't need fences to keep them in. There's a trust that people, there may be issues where they leave and go away. And so as a church, that's kind of what we're striving to do, I think, is to not have to define things so much, but to actually have the water of life, right, who's Jesus. And when people have a drink, we don't have to put walls around them. They're going to come back, okay? And so if anyone has taken linear algebra in college, which is probably 4 of us in the room, or 3 of us, it's like vectors. Location isn't quite as important. Location's very important when you have fences, right? You want to be either in or out. When it comes to wells, location isn't as important where you are, but like direction is kind of the main thing. You can go find somebody and just walk with them towards the well at some point. It doesn't matter where they are or where they start from. That journey can begin anywhere. We don't have to wait till they, find their way into the fence or out of the fence. Don't take a picture of that, Josh. I'm going to pay for that one. I'm going to pay big time for that one. Okay, I'm going to allude back to that a little bit as we go. But yeah, this journey, I love this idea of just walking with people. God walked with Adam and Eve in relationship, but also in they had jobs to do. They had animals to name, things like that. And Eugene Peterson, who wrote the Message version of the Bible, he also has a book on discipleship called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. Okay, I love that idea of just walking with someone in the same direction over and over and over again. Right now I'm coaching 5th grade girls basketball, most of which girls haven't really played before. And so for us, it's a long walk in the same direction, and we got to stick to it. Okay, it's very easy. I work with some adults who want to win tomorrow. Okay, now we got work to do. Okay, we got to learn how to dribble first, and then we learn how to pass a little bit, and it'll be a long walk. But when we get there, it'll be fun. Everybody will be better. Okay, we'll get there. That's kind of what we're shooting for. So when it comes to how Jesus walked with people, I want to build a little thing for kind of the current world today, where we're at, and how Jesus dealt with the struggles and the obstacles he had. It's a bit ironic because if you remember when I was here in October, I think, we talked about missions. It might have been in the summer. We talked about world, and I kind of, a lot of times we get doom and gloom about, like, the world's getting worse, people aren't going to church anymore, morals are going down the drain. And I kind of I was, like, trying to get our eyes up, and, like, America's, 4% of the world. Worldwide, like, the gospel is blowing up still. It's growing in parts of Asia where it's never been. Sub-Saharan Africa has exploded in the last 100 years. It's gone from like 20 to 80% Christian or something like that. And so the world is really blowing up. It's a bit ironic because I'm going to bring us back to America a little bit and look a little bit more close vision of what's going on, because it appears that things are getting worse if you zoom in a little bit more. Just a couple stats, and I want to make this as positive as possible. Any other Generation Xers out there? I don't know how many of you are, but we kind of like to be a little cynical and negative sometimes. If you guys saw Star Wars, I really wanted, like, Rey and Kylo Ren to just, like, switch sides at the end, and for Rey to become the new Sith Lord or something and destroy Kylo Ren as the new, like, Skywalker. But I like good twists like that. I feel like kindergartners could write happy endings to anything. But I like kind of those twists. But I'm going to stay as positive as I can today. But in terms of where the church is at today, in just the last 20 years, so think back to 2000. It's easy to do this math for those of you that didn't take linear algebra in college. 20 years ago was about 2000. Some of you remember farther back than that, maybe 50 years ago. Things have changed more drastically in the last, I won't say how many, Doris. Things have changed even more drastically since then, but just in the last 20, religious affiliation in the U.S. has gone from 90 to 75. So people that would say they're religious or believe in God or some sort of thing, it's gone from 90 to 75% in the U.S. That's just 20 years. Church membership's gone from 70 to 50. Okay, so membership is a tricky word because I know at Cornerstone English, like, membership's a weird thing, but same idea. 70 to 50. People that go to church regularly has gone from 45 to 35%. And that's an interesting stat, 35% that go to church regularly, because, like, on a given day, about 15% of America is in church, okay, at a church service. 15%. So what that looks like, and then, something else, they say 30 million evangelicals, which would be sort of churches like ours. 30 million evangelicals don't even go to church or belong to any church anymore. Okay, they still would say they're believers, they follow Jesus, they want to grow, but they belong to no church. So that's I think that's a really interesting thing that's happening. I think there's a lot to do with that. Anyway, so where we're at today in the U.S., I want to break into 3 groups, and it's pretty visual. And we're down to, like, pretty close, about 33%, and this is where my illustration begins. Everybody loves a good awkward sermon illustration, right? For the first group, which is about 33% of the U.S. right now, 30 to 35%, are these people that we talked about that we're down to, that are churchgoers and that connect to that culture. I'm going to go ahead and click off of that. So I'm going to have a few people represent these people for me. Joel, will you come down, please? Katie, I was always up for a good awkward illustration. I love it. And John, why don't you come up here? You can sit anywhere you want. Actually, I read pretty recently, the generation of kids I work with, high school kids, awkward is like a whole thing. But there's a reason preachers use awkward illustrations that makes everyone feel awkward. Like, your body actually creates a bunch of adrenaline when you're in an awkward situation, and it marks on your memory. So when similar situations come up, you remember it. I have so many awkward situations that just come to mind. So anyway, this is why we do it. You'll remember. So this group, about a third, is kind of church culture people. Okay, they love singing hymns. They like going to Bible studies and being at church services. They'll go to worship, concerts and read their Bibles often. About a third of America is what we're down to. Okay, so that leaves a couple more thirds left. Where are my others? Alice, come on up. And Dave, why don't you support her in this? Who else do I have? Gabe's here, right? Or did he leave? Yeah, Gabe, come on up. Fortunately, there's 2 Anweilers in the house. I can just guess, and I'll be right, usually. And so this group is kind of more postmodern, post-Christian. They don't really, they maybe grew up going to church a little bit, but it doesn't really click with them or make sense to them. They might go to a Bible study or a service if they're invited. They won't enjoy it. They won't really connect well. They might stick it out for a little while, but you can tell. And we'll get to that. Okay, so that's about a third of America. Okay, if you think about the Midwest here, it may not feel this extreme. If you've been to the East or West Coast, it's probably more that are going to be here and less in that group. But honestly, we'll be honest here in a minute. All right, and then the last group. This is a fun one. Jay, come on down. Be careful. Jenna Berkey, come on down here. I love making people feel awkward. And I'll better pick on my own family. Debbie, why don't you come up here? And just as a visual, because awkward helps us remember things, when I was thinking of people the farthest from God, this is the third that would be postmodern, post-Christian. You can start visualizing maybe people that have a pretty negative view actually of pastors in church. And those numbers are really increasing. 50, the guy's got to know the real Jay here. 50 years ago, most people were like, yeah, you should go to church even if they didn't. Pastors are good guys. They're good for spiritual guidance. And, most of America felt that way. Today, it's a higher and higher number that actually have a negative view and would prefer not to be around and don't trust pastors and churches. So the best way I came up for that visual is I just have some swag from some places that make me think of who might be farthest from God. I don't know if you can tell who that is. Jenna, you want to wear a hat? John. Oh, I was going to have John in this group. Oh, well. Which leaves a few things for this group, for our visual. You don't have a tie? Good old Mustangs. I don't know if that'll fit on you at all. But, all right. I don't know if that helps. It probably doesn't. So looking at these numbers, which is pretty, I'm not just making this up. It is about a third in just the U.S. This third over here, so if our churches are really humming along and doing well, they're going to reach that third pretty well, okay, size-wise, capacity-wise. If all of a sudden these guys did decide to come to church, that's another interesting question. I mean, Cornerstone's 100, 150 folks. If that other two-thirds, 250 to 300 people decided to come to church someday, would we be ready for that? Probably not. I was talking to a friend of mine down at Purdue who's a campus minister. He's like, we're not even prepared for modest growth in America, honestly. But all of a sudden, we would need leaders. We would need people to disciple folks. You'd have people who are really struggling. And honestly, these thirds, I actually had a friend at English Lake. I kind of set this up. And she felt a bit offended because she felt like she belonged to this group. And she'd been coming to our church for 5 years. And so I think there's people here that maybe feel like they do belong to this church. I have a complicated relationship with church myself. There's some days I feel a bit in this group where I'm struggling with some things. And so this is just something I want to bring up, some good questions to have. And we can pray a lot that these guys will change their hearts and want to come to church, okay? It's not part of their culture. It isn't how they've grown up. And we should keep praying, obviously. But there's something more there that I want to get to. Nick Scott, who's a guy from New Zealand. You guys have maybe met him. He's a friend of some UK friends of ours. His church back in New Zealand did a survey, and they asked everybody to fill it out, and they said, do you feel comfortable bringing friends to church? Would you feel comfortable bringing your friends to church? And he was really surprised that 80% of people said yes. Because his immediate answer was heck no, I would not bring my friends. He coaches field hockey in New Zealand. These guys are known as hockey boys. They're rabble rousers. They drink, they're womenizers, they do all sorts of crazy stuff. And he tries to get them in his house and get to know them. But he knows they would hate going to church. And everybody else would probably suffer as well if they showed up someday. And so he was shocked, and he kind of was like, why would 80% of people say yes? And he's like, oh, man, it's probably because most of us don't have any non-Christian friends. It's sort of this bubble we found, right, where Sure, I'd bring my friends to church because all my friends go to other churches or go to this church already. Or it's sort of this bubble we found. In the Old Testament, that I think the story never ends about how God's like, okay, I'm blessing you, Abraham. I'm blessing you, Israelites. For what purpose? Like to bless the rest of the world. That's the point. And we kept like finding this new bubble and this new thing to sink back into. All right. I should probably leave you. So if we really believe that the gospel is for, right, the whole world, for everybody, what are we going to do about this? And this is moving this way too. I think in America, we're moving this way, for better or for worse. I've heard one guy mention this where I got this stat, this 30 million evangelicals that have left the church. He is actually celebrating. He's like, finally, the church is leaving the building, right? We've been stuck in the building for so long. Finally, the church is actually getting out of the building, okay? It's been kind of fun in West Lafayette. We've saved a bunch of our Sundays to be in our neighborhood and to hang out. And somebody, I think I mentioned this last time, but there's like, when we spend too much time here, we kind of leave not God-shaped holes in people's hearts. We leave Christian-shaped holes in our neighborhoods, okay, when there's too much sort of focus there. So I want to think about what Jesus did with these groups. I think Jesus probably, 2,000 years back, 1 BC. Actually, they say Jesus was born in like 3 BC or something. We won't get into the math. There's a lot of math this morning. We won't get into the math. But imagine, I just kind of have this picture of like the Father and Jesus and this Holy Spirit hanging out, looking down on the world, seeing kind of his people, but pretty messed up. Think about sort of pre-Jesus Jewish folks. Pretty messed up people. Okay, don't celebrate too much your status over there, guys. And then the rest of the world pretty broken. I could see Jesus being like, as they're making their plan, like, can we just do another flood? You know, like, we'll build a big boat for these guys, and then just like, then we don't have to worry about this group over here, right? Let's just do that again. But what did they do? Jesus like was born. Where did he plop down? Not really over there, right? He kind of plopped down in the mess. He was born right into that mess. His first thing, he was born to an unwed pregnant woman, like back then, would probably be this group, or at least considered in this group, even if she was a Jewish person growing up. The shepherds came, dirty, stinky. He was born in sort of a place where the animals were kept. In Middle Eastern culture, that's like a really dirty thing. You don't want to be part of that. So we're going to get in a bit how Jesus moved in and out of that. I don't want to focus on the negative, like I said, but Francis Chan has a pretty interesting quote. I know you guys have kind of read some of him off and on. Let's skip it. Dave, is that at the end, do you think? There it is. So he's a guy that sort of has left his mega church that he built, wanted to move overseas, and he says, I feel like I've been fishing in the same pond my whole life, and now there's like thousands of other fishermen at the same pond, and our lines are getting tangled, and one guy tries some new lure, and we go, oh, he caught a fish. Let's all try this method. So he started getting frustrated over here. What sort of happens is, you know, when we want to plant a new church, we try to get over here, but it ends up being another chair sort of here, and then we play musical chairs, right? We get up and move around and switch. I think 98% of church growth in America is people leaving other churches to come to that church. So we brag about our church growth, but it's actually because others are dying. And so most of this is just recycled 1/3 over here. All right, so the way Jesus, I want to get into this a bit, just to define maybe who this was back in Jesus' day. I don't want to be super strict on this, but the first third would be maybe like the Pharisees, the religious folks, the synagogue people, right? Folks that know of church, they like being at the synagogue, they like that kind of stuff. I'm going to call them the thirds. They get a bad rap in the New Testament, I know, about being like super arrogant and all that. That's pretty true. Did I pick the right people? Okay. So we're going to sort of consider them the synagogue rulers and the Pharisees. This middle group would sort of be like maybe the everyman. Think about the disciples, okay? Which group do you think the disciples came out of? Probably this group, yeah. In Mark, it talks about them not washing their hands before they ate, which is a pretty big deal for those guys, okay? They got accused of not fasting at the right times, so they weren't like super great at the religion thing. Everybody was sort of Jewish and would do what they were supposed to, but they sort of were this group that they had their own stuff to do, right? Fishermen and those kind of things. This last third, I think we can probably picture your beggars, your demon-possessed folks. I probably shouldn't have picked those first. Also your non-Jews, right? So like your Gentiles, Romans, Samaritans, those kind of folks. Man, the New Testament talks about a lot of like would be considered like half-breed people, like Syrophoenicians, Samaritans. Samaritans were kind of half-breeds. They were sort of half Jewish, half not. So thinking about those three groups, I needed Jesus. Which Anweiler's got the hair? Yeah, come on up. Come on up. All right, is this? I think he's the most like Jesus, at least that I know. Although I had longer hair than that at some point in my life. Okay, I guess, right. All right, what I'm going to do is walk through a bit of Mark and just pop through a few highlights. If you want to follow along, you can. I'm in Mark 1. Mark is a fun gospel in that there's just a lot of action going on. Jesus is just going and moving a ton. And so I'm just going to read a few things of places Jesus went, how he walked, who he walked with, and not just location. So like if he was hanging out with Pharisees by the river, we'll still say that was sort of group one, Pharisees and synagogue people. If he was, with his disciples at the beginning or something, it would be this group. And then if he was doing other stuff, we'll be there. So I'm going to have you guys help me a little bit. This is group 1, group 2, group 3. And we'll go from there. I'm just going to bounce in and out. If you want to follow, I'm going to be in Mark 1. I've got about 10 different parts in Mark 1, maybe more, where he's with somebody different. All right, so after Jesus was put in prison, Jesus went to Galilee proclaiming the good news. I'm going to go back to my map. Sometimes maps help. So he went back to Galilee to preach the good news. Which group would that have been going out to preach news in the towns? Probably 2. Yep, so come over and stand with 2. You're going to be moving. Hopefully you can stretch. Then he walked beside the Sea of Galilee, found Simon and his brother fishing. Still 2, right? Preparing their nets. Then he went to we're in verse 21, still in chapter 1. He went to Capernaum and went to the synagogue in Capernaum. Good. Capernaum was a really religious city where they did that stuff. But then all of a sudden in the synagogue, a demon, someone who was possessed with an evil spirit came at him. Yep. Get over. So somehow in the synagogue, he's sort of doing both, right? He's walking. And then he left the synagogue and went to the home of James and John. So where would that be? 2. And he's in somebody's house now. So like, get in there. Go sit with somebody. Go sit on somebody's lap. There you go. So he went to their home. And then that evening, all the sick and demon-possessed people came. And he healed them. Back to 3. He's still sort of in the house. That's weird. I don't know what to do with that. Verse 35, he left the house and went to a solitary place. We'll actually call that 4. So like go off and be by yourself. So now he's off. I'm making this up as I go. You guys know that. He went off to be by himself. And then when his disciples came, he said, let us go to the nearby villages to preach. 2, yep. So come on back to 2. You can preach with them a little bit. Get them saved. Then he went back to Galilee, preaching in the synagogues. So back into the synagogues, preaching, reaching those guys. And then all of a sudden, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him at his knees. Cruise on back. All right, here we go. A few days later, he came to Capernaum and went to Peter's home. Yeah. Go sit on somebody again. Yeah. He's back in somebody's house again. And then some men came bringing him a paralytic. Back in those days, a paralytic could be considered sort of cursed. Now we're getting some good stuff. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi the tax collector's house. 3, and where on 3? Yeah, go sit. There we go. So he's not just like talking to him. He's in the house having dinner with him. And then he left and went to the grain fields and walked with his disciples. 2, yeah. Some of his disciples might have been 3s. All right, let's go ahead and jump forward to chapter 5. Just wait. John, you asked. Chapter 5, when they came to the home of the synagogue ruler. So not only do we see him walking along with people, and I marked kind of the 1, 2s, and 3s. There's probably 10 to 20 in each of these chapters, all the way up through 10. I was going in order too. So he sort of has this rhythm moving out in and out of these groups really without a whole lot of really any seams, right? He probably took some of his disciples as he went here. I bet he took disciples as he went there. Some of those synagogue rulers, we know Nicodemus and others were kind of in on what he was doing. I'm guessing they followed him to some of these other places. So he had a pretty seamless way of doing that. I think that's probably good. You got in everybody's house at one point, right? Yeah, good. I figured you'd remember if you had, but all right, you can head on back. Thank you, Jesus. You guys, I might keep you up for just a second. So ask us just a real quick question. Where did Jesus seem the most comfortable? I know we didn't really read much of the scripture, but knowing what you know about the Gospels, where did Jesus feel most comfortable? Yeah, kind of here. I think he seemed to feel the most comfortable. Where was the most tension? Yeah, over here. There was a lot of tension just about the religiosity. I think we know there was some Pharisees and stuff that really were digging in and trying to get there. So we don't want to get them too bad. But one of my favorite things is actually come back. Nate. One of my favorite things is in Luke when we talk about Zacchaeus. When it comes to Jesus walking with people, Jesus called Zacchaeus down and said, "Hey, Zacchaeus, come with me to church to get saved. Come with me to the temple to pray." What did he say? Come with me to your house. Okay. And what did Jesus do when he got there? I think they ate. They hung out. Okay. So all of a sudden he comes to Zacchaeus' house. Can you get him some tea or something? Zacchaeus is like probably serving Jesus food and water. It was this really mutual experience at that point. Jesus had a way of walking in and not just being the one to heal or being the one to do the thing, but he had a way of letting people serve him, and it was definitely a shared experience, because that's how you find, especially in the Middle East, but I think we all admit, when someone comes into your home, that's like an entrance into your world and into your heart, right? They've committed something to you, and Jesus found homes everywhere he went, even the people he didn't like. John, who did he sit? Was that you, John? Yeah. He even he didn't sit on John's lap. He even found that. Cool. And I think we still have this Old Testament mindset. I wanted to do this visual a bit, that the holy places are over here, right? At church, at certain times, certain places, when we say certain words or have the right music playing. But do we really believe the kingdom is where we carry it, and the kingdom is with us? Can that be in a bar? Can that be at North Judson? We were doing a little study group sort of with a few friends from church, and we meet at Route 10, right on Highway 10 there, and sit in the back. And Stark County culture is a bit like, you don't want to be seen in the bar if you work for a church. But anyway, I walked in once to meet with friends, and I saw like a pastor of one of the other churches sitting there as well. And we kind of did this like look at each other like, I won't tell if you don't tell. Like, I was like, James? He's like, Steve? Like, it was pretty awkward. Anyway, we crossed paths. Can it happen there? Can it happen at the county jail? Can the kingdom exist? God forbid, right? Or over, at lunch over a ham sandwich on a random Tuesday at work. Where does the kingdom work? Where does it live? Where are we comfortable walking in and out of as we go? What I love in verse 9, if anybody's even with me in Mark anymore, I know we're all over the place. In 9:33, Jesus has been doing this for a long time. It's almost like this number one group is being redefined, right, wherever he goes. Like the new holy guys that want to be with him, sort of, it's like Jesus is taking them on the road. It says, when they came to Capernaum and went back to Peter's house, what were you arguing about on the road? He's starting to ask them questions, disciple them. They said something dumb, so he took a child who, just like a random kid was hanging around, like it was just somebody's house, and said, whoever welcomes one of these kids. And so he sort of took this one group or this kingdom thing on the road as he went. That is something that's, to use John's word, radical. You were probably hippie at one point. You can use it. Okay. That is something that I think shouldn't be radical, but it sort of has become for us. And it's a struggle. Am I done with you guys? Yeah, you can go back. Thank you, awkward people. I'm going to leave the chairs. Cool. So as we kind of think about that visual, walking in and out of these places, and having like real relationship in and out of these places, what that could look like, I want to just go over a few principles that I kind of came to my heart a bit when it comes to what it means to walk with people. Definitely when you go for a walk, you're going from something, right? There's something you're leaving, maybe repenting from or walking away from. and you're walking to something else, like a new purpose or something like that. We can go down the line with his disciples. Some were tax collectors. Some were, I think Mary Magdalene had 7 demons at one point, and they think she was probably a prostitute, And so her walking with him was a very visual way of walking towards something. But also, a lot of Jesus's disciples were fishermen. And I love fishing. Fishing's awesome, right? So did they have to walk away? What does that mean to walk away from something like fishing or something like these everyman stuff? It doesn't mean we all leave our normal jobs and go be pastors or something, right? Or God forbid, that's the opposite of actually what we should be doing. Or leave these sort of good things. But what does it mean to leave a good thing for something, I don't even know the right word sometimes, more? Not just a better thing or more of it, but something more that God might be calling us into. So another level of following him that might look like. The rich young ruler had everything, right? He seemed to have everything figured out. If you guys remember that story from the New Testament, he followed all the laws. He had a lot of money, a lot of authority. But Jesus kind of had something more to call him up to, and it wasn't just give away his stuff. I think there was something deeper Jesus was getting to, and he couldn't do it. He couldn't handle it, even though what he was doing was already pretty good. For us, moving from North Judson to West Lafayette has been a hard move. North Judson was a great 3 or 4 years for us. I was working part-time for the church, so it was really fun to be in and out of there with guys like Steve Lucas, just being discipled by him, being able to teach and preach some. And then I worked in alternative school half-time, so I was teaching, which is sort of my main gift, like high school teaching. But some of these at-risk kids. And it's not like when we moved to West Lafayette, it was because there was more of those things that God wanted us to do. It was more quantity. It was a different calling, and it was ready to leave a really good thing for a new thing. And I think God sort of had a way of saying, okay, yeah, what was happening there was good for you, okay, but was it good for my plan? Was it good for your neighborhood you hadn't quite moved into yet, or the things that were about to be affected by you moving? Or for the young people at English Lake who are I'm filling a spot there. When I leave, there's room now for people to come up and to do what I was doing, people that I kind of was walking with and discipling. And so there's this process, I think, of leaving good to better. Probably my most favorite, and this is probably the most challenging, is walking takes you to the edges. If I was going to go for a walk with you right now,